going back to church because um, I've been talking about this since 2021 when God called me to go back to church. And I feel like Nikki's story is very similar to mine. And with like deciding not to go back to church, she's like, I'm done with that. And God started calling her to go back to church. So we're going to be talking about that and exactly how God showed up, because I think that is such an important thing that we don't talk about. Sometimes we just have this fear of like we put God in a box, right? So if you're new here, I am Melissa Batt, a Christian life and business coach. I'm the podcast host of Priorities on Purpose. And without further ado, we're going to bring on Nikki, and then we're going to go on and get started with the podcast episode. Okay. All right. If you are here, though, say hi and share this, because this is a message for so many. Because I know God is calling some of you back to church. You haven't been going to church. Maybe it was the pandemic. Maybe it's trauma from going to church and being part of a church that did you wrong. But I know God is calling some of y'all to go back to church. So whether it's you or maybe a friend, you don't have to call them out, but I would love it if you would share this so we can get this message out to the masses, because it's so important. Also, comment. Again, once I bring her on, we're probably not gonna um, reference the comments, but we will towards the end. So comment as much as you would like. If you share it, hashtag shared. If you're gonna go back and watch the replay, I'm cool with that too. But I would love for you to interact with us, because the algorithm loves that as well. All right. Without further ado, let's bring on Nikki. Hey,
Hello.
Nikki.
How's it going,
Okay.
Melissa?
It's going. It's going. Okay. So, first of all, if I haven't acknowledged this yet, Fridays I normally don't work, and this really is how I look most days. But I know that if you follow me for any length of time, there's one thing I love to do on Fridays. Do you know what it is, Nikki?
It's mowing.
Mowing. I love being on the lawnmower. It's just like, oh, it soothes my soul. And so,
I like
yes,
to watch
so
people mow.
you're funny. Okay, so we're going to go on and get started. Again, make sure you share this and engage with us as we have this conversation, because I know this is a message that's so valuable to so many people, and it's very on time message. So here we go. Are you ready to start the podcast? Let's hit the button. The podcast is officially recording. Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of Priorities on Purpose. I have a treat for you today, because one of my coaching clients is going to be coming on. She's joining me now, and we are going to be talking about what happens when God calls you to go back to church and you finally decide to suck it up and do it, because it's not easy. It's scary. And depending on what has happened in your life that has gotten you to this point where you are not in church, it can be even scarier, especially if you are going by yourself, right? And so, without further ado, we have Nikki on to talk to me about this topic. Thank you, Nikki, for just being willing to share your story, because as a Christian who is not going to church, I do think there's a little bit of a stigma there that, we don't want to talk about, like, yeah, I'm not going to church. Um,
Yep.
and then there's, anyway, so we're just going to go on. Like, Nikki, tell everyone a little bit about yourself, who you are. I can't remember if you've actually been on the podcast before or not.
I think just when we were doing our Wednesday laser coaching, you might have had me on for a little bit, but I was raised in a Pentecostal church. I now think of it as old time Pentecost. So where you they had rules that you went by to the letter of the law. And not that those are the most important things, but it ends up being the most important thing that they is focused on. And so growing up there and then being married there and raising my boys there I started seeing things where it wasn't equal among women and men and women, which, from my pastor's perspective, that's the way it's supposed to be. However, being a single mom and trying to raise my boys there after a divorce, which they don't believe in at all, um, I had to make a change because the Bible says you put your family first, then your God, family, and then church. And it was church, family, and God, and I was not having enough time to take care of my kids. So I made the decision to leave, and I was ostracized. And it really hurt me a lot. Especially I saw a lot of it during my divorce. And there was a lot of times I was not asked to do things anymore because I wasn't married, because I had divorced. And I had done, I had worked in the school, I had worked for the church, I had done praise singing and choir and played in the orchestra and all of those things. And so it was a really difficult thing to be cut off instead of embraced. Instead of asking me what else what can we do to help you raise these boys, it was either toe the line or we're not going to use you. So I left and I did it on my own.
So you were basically, what I hear you saying is you were heavily involved in the church that you'd been attending. You had been
Yeah.
attending it for a really long time.
I've been there
Something
my entire
happened
life.
your
Yeah.
entire life. Wow. And
Yeah.
then something happened. You ended up divorced,
Hmm.
and
And
nobody checked on you or like
I
asked
had
questions or anything.
mm-mm. I had a couple of close friends that they made sure that they were checking up on me. My mom had been was going with me, so I always had her with me. But it wasn't, and the thing of it is they knew what had happened because they knew that my husband had stepped out of our marriage. But they never offered comfort or support or anything like that. And so
And then on
I
top
at
of
the
that,
time I yeah, yeah. And so it was really hard for me. I tried to stay involved as much as I could, and it just became apparent that, and plus, Oliver, my oldest, as we all know, he was diagnosed with ADHD at that time, and he was a real struggle. I didn't. I was just learning how to deal with a kid with that, and it was. I kept getting asked, "Why don't you make him behave?" Well, you can't make. I mean, that's like asking, "Why is the water blue?" And I was just struggling so much as a parent, and my mom helped me as much as she could. But finally, there were so many services that we would need to go to. At the time, we were having 4 services a week, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I was taking Oliver to the psychologist, and he was like, "Y'all need a routine every day." And he needs to be in a bed at a certain time. And I couldn't do that if I was at church 3 nights a week, you know. So I just made, after some things had been said and done, I made the decision I just couldn't do it too much. It was just too much stress on myself. So I just thought either I would go back if they got older and things calmed down, or I would just go someplace else. And going someplace else was scary to me because I had been raised in that church my entire life. And I stopped going when I was maybe late 20s. Yeah, I was my late 20s when I had stopped going. So,
Wow.
but,
And you're in your 40s now.
but I love, yeah, I
Are
wish
you
I
in your
was in my
40s
40s.
still?
I just,
Yeah. I thought you
no,
just
I
hit the
turned
50.
50. Yeah, I
Yeah.
turned
So
50
you
this
went
year.
like
Yeah,
30 years without going to church?
almost. Yeah. Now I would
Wow.
still, yeah, I would still, there was times I would still pray, not like faithfully, because you quit going to church, then you end up getting yourself into some situations that's not good. Like I was in a relationship with a man who was an alcoholic, and that turned bad, and so I had to get out of that. And that was like almost 10 years of my adult life. And so at that point, I was like, it's just impossible to be with another person, another human being, and have a relationship when you have three kids and one of them has, you know, um, at the time, ADHD. And so I
And
just
hold
was,
on, because at this point, like it was ADHD, but there was more going on, right? Like, do you want to share a
yeah,
little bit about that?
he had more problems going on, which, as he got into high school, he was diagnosed with, schizoaffective disorder. And so, and that's what's happened with a lot of our kids. That's the first thing that most of them are diagnosed with is ADHD, but they don't want to diagnose them their true, whatever the issue is until they're older. And that's just because of the medical studies that they've had about it. But, during that
Well, I
time,
think that right there is something that needs to be talked about, like the
yeah,
pressure on you as a mom involved in church, and people are like, you need to get your kid in line. Why
yeah,
aren't you disciplining them? You know what I mean? Like, that's so hard. And the
yeah,
pressure that moms feel anyway, like just trying to keep up, and it's exhausting. And then
yeah,
to feel like you're not a good mom because your kid is acting up.
yeah. And it's not that he was acting up, he just didn't know what to do with himself.
Yeah.
I mean, their mind is understimulated and they're trying to do things to keep themselves busy.
How old
That's
was
how,
he?
at the time he was like 6 or 7. He was
Okay.
6 or 7. And
Yeah.
he was having a lot of struggle in school. And the first thing that happened was I took him out of the Christian school that our church had. So that was the first thing that had happened. And that's a whole nother story in itself. Some things that happened to him, he wasn't treated fairly. No matter, it didn't even matter how much I explained to them and asked them to learn more about the ADHD, they refused. And he was bad today, you know. And so I just took him out, put him in a public school, and then worked with the school to get him an IEP and so that he would get the help that he needed. It That's just a whole nother story, in itself.
Well,
But
that sounds like it adds to the church trauma.
yeah,
And why, like, you did not have a good experience in that
hmm,
church, which probably, if that's the only church you knew,
it was.
and that's kind of repulsive, in my
Yeah,
opinion, the way they treated you, the way they treated your kids, the
hmm,
way that, you gave everything to the church, and then all of a sudden, when you didn't look the part or act the part, or
yeah,
you couldn't be what they needed, instead of
right,
saying like, hey, how can we partner with you to help you, they
yeah,
just
yeah.
dropped you.
And I think a lot of it is ignorance, and
Yeah.
then using ignorance as an excuse to not move forward, to learn, to open up, and to help their, you know, the their members. I I just it was just and too much for me at that time. I mean,
Yeah.
I knew I had depression, but I wasn't diagnosed with it for I was not diagnosed with bipolar disorder until my kids were, I think, in middle school, going into high school. And I
Okay.
just, I just didn't know what to do anymore. I went to the doctor. I was like, I don't know what to do. I have moments where I feel fine, and then I have moments where it's like I it's like I'm in a manic mode, and so and then now being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, getting the medication down was a long process because I what medication to put me on made me into a no feeling zombie. So, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I was
Well,
like, I feel great. I don't feel anything, you know.
yeah, that's the hard thing of like trying to find, the right medication and
Yeah.
all of that. Okay, so it definitely makes sense why you were so turned off and kind of gave up on the church, because when you
Mhm.
needed the church the most, they weren't
Mhm.
there for you,
Yeah.
right? And I
Right.
do think that we have to remember that, for others that are listening, um, the church is full of people who are broken. They
Mhm.
aren't God, and I think sometimes, without even realizing it, we put the church on a pedestal of like equal
Oh
to God,
yeah. Yeah.
and that's not right, because
Mhm.
the church is full of broken people. Even the
Yeah.
pastor, even the
Mhm.
deacons, or whatever you want to go, the elders of the church, like they're all broken people. And I don't think that means like they get a pass and can do whatever they want. I think that,
Mhm.
we have to continue to pray for them, that their eyes will be open to some of the things where they
Mhm.
are not being obedient, or not just open to like
Mhm.
learning. Um, the first thing that I thought of when you talked about the divorce and everything just reminds me of how we avoid what we don't want to talk about. And I can see how people in the church would avoid talking about it because they didn't know what to say, and they
Yeah.
didn't want to say the wrong thing. And so they didn't say anything at all. And
Mhm.
again, you see an elephant back there, acknowledge the elephant. It doesn't matter. Like, just
Yeah.
say something. Stop. Like, you cannot avoid it altogether, because you took that as they didn't care. And some of them
Mhm.
may have really been just totally messed up in, their beliefs and
That's
everything
so
like that.
true. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
some
And
of
I,
them may have just not known what to say. So they said nothing at all. And you took that as
yeah.
rejection, when
Mhm.
really it was just them not knowing, because so many of us, we avoid what's uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah. That's
Um,
true.
and
That's
so
true.
that's a
And it's
call out for everybody. Like, do not avoid the uncomfortable.
and I agree with that. And especially in a church family, where you grew up together with people. And my pastor and his wife, I love them to death. My pastor is since passed, or I always still call him my pastor, but he's, has passed away. But I learned so much about the Bible from him and his teachings. He was always someone that got into the word and was really able to explain it, to where you could understand it, you know. And so those are things that has put a love in my heart about learning more about the word. And that's what has drawn me to wanting to go find another church to go to these past couple of years, because I've been yearning for that learning again. Like I've been missing it. And it's come and go over the years, but it's just been really strong in my heart the last couple of years.
Yeah. So now let's get into this of you going back to church, because I know, gosh, there's so much. When you told me this, like how this all worked, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to talk about this, because
Yeah.
It is such a big deal and so cool to see how God has worked this out. So,
Yeah.
for 2 years, I don't even remember when, but I remember through one of our coaching calls, or maybe even the Stockton Unstoppable workshop, I may have said to you, like, I feel like, do you think God is calling you to go back to church? I think maybe I didn't even know you didn't go to church.
Yeah.
I normally just assume, if you're a Christian, I just assume you go to church. So when that happened, that was probably 2020, maybe
Yeah.
2021, in that conversation. And then at what point was it you that I asked when in a coaching call? I was like, is there any area in your life where you feel like you're being disobedient? Was that you or was that
Yeah,
someone else?
that was us. I mean, or me.
Okay.
Yeah, you had, well, I think you did assume that I did go to church, and I just said, no, I haven't been going. And the first time you had asked me, I had went and visited my old church, but I just didn't build that connection there. And so I just kind of like, I hope Melissa doesn't bring it up again because I'm like, well, maybe I could watch some church services on YouTube or something, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And but yeah, you had asked if I was being disobedient. I was like, yeah, I need to go back to church, but I'm just so afraid. First of all, of what church to go to, because I know what I believe in, and I didn't want to go to a church that didn't believe the same doctrine that I had been raised in. And
Mm-hmm.
so I looked at the different churches in the area, and I had in mind a couple that I wanted to go to. And you're like, you need to keep going. You need to go. And I was like,
We talked about this for weeks. And I also want to bring up this right here about that disobedience, because to be honest, I hope it's okay that I bring this up. In our coaching calls, you were
yeah,
kind of frustrated because you're like, I am doing all the things. Why is this not working? Like,
yeah,
why am I like, I feel like I'm not moving forward, which I think you were moving forward, but you weren't moving as forward as you felt like there was still something in the way.
yeah, yeah, for
And
sure.
I know that, like, when there's an area where God is telling you to do something and you're not doing it, that can get in the way, right? And
Yeah,
so
for
that's
sure.
what led me to asking the question in the first place. I'm like, is there any area in your life where you could be out of alignment and
Yeah.
where you're being disobedient and you're like, church? And I was like, I thought you went back to church a long time ago. You were like,
No, I
no.
said I just visited.
Yeah. So then we had a conversation, and we had talked for a while. Like, you were doing
Hmm.
it, like this was part of your thing that you were working on, and you still like kept putting it off. And I think I finally was like, okay, you give me your requirements. What is it you're looking for? How many people? How far away
Yeah,
can it be?
yeah,
What kind of like worship style you want? I asked all of the questions,
yeah.
and then I said, let me see if I can find, like, I will do the research for you, narrow it down to three, and you pick from those three.
Right.
And so we did that.
Yeah,
And
so
then what
I was
happened?
so when you said you were going to find that, I was like, okay, she's going to find me a church. And I thought, well, if she doesn't, because this was what I think was Thursday, and I thought if she doesn't have enough time to search and get me something by Sunday, I'm going to go to this one church that I had in my mind that I had been wanting to go, but I've been dragging my feet on. And so when you sent me two names of two churches, one of the churches that I had in my head was the one that you had on your list. And I thought, that's it. That's the one I need to go
Yeah, God had been
to.
telling you to go to that one all along. You just wasn't recognizing that it was God saying, this one. This one. This one. Like
I
me, I'm like,
know.
sometimes we need the brick. I always say, like, sometimes I just need God to hit me with a brick.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And I just get so wound up about what ifs and should haves and could haves and and I kept thinking about how I was raised and because this church doesn't exactly believe how I would, how I was raised, but I just told God, I'm like, you're just going to have to work with me and open my eyes and just help me deal with this. And that next Sunday I went to the Sunday school, and because that starts at 9:30, and when I walked into the adult class, uh, someone was there that I had grown up with, and he came over and gave me a hug and sat with me, and I was like, oh, thank God. I'm not really here by myself.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
I
and you
was so
got there
nervous.
early. You didn't realize that they were doing like this networking or like, Sundays. Like you ended up for Sunday school before you actually went to a church service, like
Yeah.
in the sanctuary,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How cool is that? When you told me that, I was like, God knew I got to bring her
Yeah.
somebody.
I
And
know.
so he had prepared for
Hmm.
you in advance to have someone there to see
Yeah.
you because you went by yourself. And I know that right there is like a huge fear for a lot of people. Like
It
it's
is.
nice to have a sidekick, someone that's going to go with you. So if you have no one else to
Right.
talk to, you at least have that person, right?
Right.
But
Right.
you were courageous and you did it and you went by yourself. And the first thing you see is someone that who
Yeah.
also went to your old church, correct?
Yep. Yep, he did. Yeah, we were raised in the same church, growing up. And and he's just someone that is like he's like a big brother. And so I mean, even to this day, even though I hadn't been going, anytime I saw him out or his wife out, it was just we would just pick up a conversation like we had never been apart. And so I really, really cherish that moment because that helped me ease into this transition without any hiccups, you know. And so when the Sunday school was over, then they had their regular service. And it was like just a regular old Pentecostal service that I grew up with. It was so comfortable and it was so familiar. And I just loved how the people there were just ready to go. They were ready to worship, ready to sing. And the pastor, I mean, he's a great guy. And I thought, this is the place I need to be. I really have loved it. So going there.
Okay, so now let's talk about because you decided to go on a Wednesday, like because
Yeah.
you're like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going all the way, right? And
Yeah.
so you go on Wednesday again by yourself. And this freaked you
Hmm.
out a little bit because you realized they split it up, women together and men together. So your
Yeah.
friend wasn't going to be in there.
Right. So on Wednesdays, I thought it would just be kind of a regular service. And come to find out is they split the men up from the women, and the women are taught by the pastor's wife, and it's very casual. And I walk in and I'm like sort of dressed up for a Sunday service, because that's just how we were raised, was to be dressed up whenever you went. And I was like, oh no, they're doing something completely different. So I sat in the back. I didn't know what was happening. And one of the ladies that I now know, she's been there for 35 years. She walked by and she realized I was someone new. So she introduced herself and just like stayed by me the whole time. So, and then they offer refreshments on Wednesdays. So she stayed in line with me, she ate with me, and we got to talking. And she was talking about that she's doing part time bookkeeping work for Richmond Friends Church. And I had made a donation to that church. And she was talking about how they come across odd names. And she said, yeah, we came across an odd name that's Motherhood something. And I said, Motherhood Unfiltered? And she said, yeah. I said, well, that's my podcast name. Motherhood Unfiltered is going to be okay. And so we had that connection where, um, we just thought how small of a world it is. And then I found out even more later that she used to work with my sister at the Richmond Symphony Orchestra. And so I've just really gotten close to her. She's prayed with me and we've confided in each other. And I just love that God has just put those people there. And this church has created a system to where you should feel that welcoming, no matter what day of the week it is. And I've just really loved it. I've opened up faster because of that, you know, being at that church. So I'm
Yeah, I
just really
love that you
blessed.
said that because at the time you didn't know that they actually had a system in place where someone's role is when
Yeah.
they're looking for those new people. So those
Mhm.
people don't feel like an outcast, a reject, or,
Mhm.
someone who doesn't belong. Because
Mhm.
when we go into church, a new church, especially by ourselves, it is
Yeah.
scary.
It is.
And,
Yeah.
there's you have, depending on the size of the church, I think, some people like they don't want people to talk to them
Yeah.
because I think that makes it feel safer. They don't have
Mhm.
to connect. Although, like, the whole point is for you to connect and
Mhm.
get to know other people and have that faith family. And I just
Mhm.
think when you told me this, I'm like, first of all, I was
Yeah.
like, again, God, like, knew you needed somebody.
Yeah.
You're someone that kind of struggles with anxiety. You are an introvert. Talking to
Mhm.
a bunch of random strangers isn't something that you're like, yes, I get to do that today. But, so God,
No.
again, just brought you someone. And then to find out, like, the church actually is aware and has a plan in place.
Yeah,
Man,
I
like,
know.
I love that church just for that alone, because every church should have that,
Yeah.
because people need to be seen, feel seen, and they just sped up the process for you,
Mhm.
so you could, like you said, so you felt like you could open up. And
Yeah, they do a thing where they have house moms, and so each lady has like 4 or 5 names and assigned to them, and then they have a it's their responsibility to make sure that they're together, that if they're not at church, that they've been called and talked to, and she was one of those. Now she is my house mom, and because we've just meshed so well together. We just get along really well now, from that. It's so much, in fact, that the pastor asked me how long I've known her because he thought we were friends before I started coming. I was like, oh, I just met her a couple months ago when I started coming here. He was
yeah,
just
that's
shocked.
awesome.
So
Okay.
I love that whole idea.
Yeah, I think if you're listening and you go to church, you need to talk to your church about starting something like that if you don't have it,
Hmm.
because it is such a cool
Yeah.
philosophy. Again, like, nobody left behind,
Yeah.
because so
Exactly.
many times, like, that's what keeps people coming, because they
Hmm.
they feel seen
Hmm.
and they want to be a part of something. Okay,
Right.
so we're going to fast forward now to the conversation with your husband, because, again, sometimes we don't recognize that our obedience isn't just setting us
Mm-hmm.
up for our relationship with God, but it's also for those others who are around as
Mm-hmm.
well. And so when you started going back to church, your husband didn't want to go, so you've been going by yourself.
Yeah.
And so, talk to me a little bit about that conversation with your husband, and not that you nagged him to like, come with me, but like just talk about how your obedience has affected him in his
Mm-hmm.
relationship with God.
Well, so I had told him, and he's known for a while that I wanted to go back, but where to go, we've been on a disagreement about. And so I just told him that I was just going to go for myself and that I would love for him to go with me. And he said that he would go, but not go all the time. And I was like, okay, I can handle that. And he did go with me on Easter, but we had a conversation and where I told him that I felt like God wanted to use him to speak out, to teach the word to other people. And he was just like, kind of like shocked that I had said that to him. And I could hear the fear in his voice, because he is such an intelligent person and he studies things all the time. Now, granted, it might be politics, but he's always learning. And I told him, I said, I feel like that just as God wants to use me to tell other people about him, I feel like he wants to use you in the same capacity. And I feel like that's why you are so adamant about not being a member of a church, is because of that. And he really didn't know what to say about that. He's like, that might be true. Like he was afraid to say because if you acknowledge it, then you got to address it or
Mm-hmm.
ignore it. And I mean, I haven't had that conversation with him again, but I just thought that I would just try to implement it more into our life. And so, um, I, with our breakthrough challenge, I've been been writing out little sayings of inspiration and just trying to uplift him, but also adding in a verse or two. And he really loves that. He loves that I've been doing that. And I just want him, to feel that as much as I was scared, I know he's going to be scared and that, we can do this together. And of course, God is going to help us through it.
Mm-hmm.
But I just, he's just got to find it on his own. I mean, I can't force him to.
Yeah, you can't nag him. Like, I didn't nag you, like, you gotta go. You need to go right now, right now. Like, you just did it. And
Yeah.
finally, you had to, I just was like, okay, what is getting in your way? What is going on that's keeping you from going? How can I help you with that? And you can ask some of those questions to support him. But if
Yeah.
you were never to go back, he would not have gotten the clarity that he needs to
Hmm.
go back. And
Yeah.
so God is working on him. You can already just tell. Now, I want to share, we just have a couple minutes left,
Hmm.
but I would love for you to talk now about something. This just kind of came to me. I hope it's okay that we talk about this. You never know when you get me like on here where we're going. But I would love to talk with you a little bit about our coaching call this last week about the boldness. You've been praying for boldness,
Yeah.
and where you feel like God is calling you. I would love for you to say it out loud, live for everyone, because I think there's so much power about bringing that, into the light instead of like
Yeah.
keeping it hidden. And so just talk to me a little bit about that. Are you okay to do that? Like, are you
Yeah.
willing? Okay, good.
Yeah,
Just not, you know, you judge by everybody. So talk to me a little bit about that. Remember, boldness comes with taking action. So you don't need boldness, you need courage. That's kind of what we
hmm
talked about.
Yeah,
You know, just like you don't need confidence. Confidence comes from taking action and being courageous. And so, again,
right.
for the boldness and using your voice and speaking and doing what you know God is calling you to do, it's not so much the boldness that you need, it's the courage. So
hmm
share a little bit about what you know God is calling you to do, and let's talk about it.
Well, I've been, like you said, I've been praying and asking God to give me boldness because I I have this desire to talk to women who have been struggling with depression and anxiety, and to talk to them about the things that they need to do to help themselves, and tell them about God. If they don't know Jesus, then Jesus can help them with all of that, give them comfort when they need it. And I've just been so afraid to just come out and start talking about it, because the last couple of years on my podcast, for instance, that's like the main place where I want to talk about this. I've been interviewing people. And so I want to change that to where I'm talking and giving them the word and giving them actual things that they can do to help live with this depression and anxiety, and to be able to offer them some kind of a hope, because there are times when I've been in a bad depression, I felt like I had no hope, and I don't want anybody else to feel that. It just hurts me, when I think about someone losing their animal and they never find the animal again, and that, just feeling that loss in your heart, or they lose a loved one, who was maybe young and passed away. I just feel it in my chest, and I just had been asking God to give me that courage and that boldness to not to be afraid to say what I feel like He's given me to tell people. And so that's what we were talking about this week.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And specifically, like in the church, I would
hmm
love for you to share how you felt God telling you to do something and like all of your worries. Can we talk about that for a minute?
yeah. Yeah, we could talk about that. How the lady that had befriended me at the church, she had went up. The pastor had asked people who had a special request to come up, and he would lay hands on them and pray for them. And my friend had went up there, and I felt like I should have went up with her and prayed with her. But I was thinking, I was like, I just started coming here. Nobody knows me. Nobody, they're going to think, what, who is she? Does she even have the Holy Spirit? Has she even been baptized? Does she even know what she's doing?
Is
You
she
know,
even
they,
saved?
exactly. So who am I to go up there and act like I know what I'm doing, right? And so I didn't go up. I mean, I did pray for her from my seat, but when she came back, I asked her if she was okay, and she said she felt better. And I said, well, I felt like I should have went up and prayed with you, but I didn't, because, and then I told her how I was feeling. And she's like, nobody cares about that. You pray with who you feel like you need to pray with. That's what God is telling you to do. And I was like, bam, I should have just went up there. And I told her, I said, well, next time I will. I promise I will. I said, I just was all up in my head, all up in my own feelings about it. And so I was like, okay, Lord, you told me to do something and I didn't know do it. So,
Yeah. And it's so hard how the enemy comes and like just wrecks
yeah,
us with all of these
exactly.
what ifs. What if? I don't want this person to think this. I don't want this person to think about this, even though like we aren't supposed to care about the opinion of man.
We
We
do.
should.
Yeah.
It's a struggle. It is a
Yeah.
struggle.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing, it's funny. My watch just said, "You did it. You've earned another hour towards your stand goal." I've been, I guess, using my hands too much. That's hilarious. The little things that catch my attention,
Yeah.
squirrels,
I know.
ADHD.
I have
Um,
squirrels too.
so in that, like when you said that, and I don't know if I told you this on our call or not, but I actually had those same exact, like God was calling me to go to the altar.
Hmm.
And I was like, people are going to think that I'm like going to get saved, but I'm already saved. I'm not going to the altar. Like I had
Yeah.
all of these thoughts. Like I just kept talking to God about, I'm like, go to the altar. Like, first of all, and then he started calling me to go to the altar before an altar call.
Oh Lord.
And like,
Yeah.
which our church has like you come to the altar whenever God calls you to go to the altar. You don't have to wait for a specific come to the altar message.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so thankfully there is that. But I was like, God, no, you want me to go now? And again, I'm like, okay, I wrestle with it for a minute, do the whole like, if this song lasts one more, like they start singing the song one more time, then I'll
Then
go.
I'll
And it
go.
did. And so I started doing that. And that's when God had kind of given me this message of like, go first. Like, you got to go
Hmm.
first. And I think some of us who have family that's unsaved, or
Yeah.
others that aren't where we are in our faith, like we don't want to go first,
Right.
but God is calling us to go first. And in that, like, we are the cycle breakers
Hmm.
and God is going to use us. And so going first, being willing to, go without the worry of what other people will think.
Right.
It's really hard, since
Yeah.
2021, I think it was 2021, I've been talking about the spirit of resistance and how the enemy wants you to not do the thing God is calling. And so he will
Yeah.
use resistance of like, all of the things that you said. I don't want people to think I'm weird. I don't want, like, they're going to think I know it. I think I'm a know-it-all, or,
Yeah.
they're going to think I want to be the center of attention. Like, there are so many different things that will
Exactly.
go in our head, and
Yeah.
their opinions are none of our business.
Right.
And even if they do, that's on them. And so one of
Yeah.
the things that God has really taught me since, like, he's been working on me since I believe January 2018. It may have been 2019. No, it had to have been 2018 because I was still in South Carolina.
Hmm.
Um, was to use my voice, to speak. When
Yeah.
I felt that, like, don't worry about what other people think, don't worry about the outcome, just
Hmm.
say in that moment what you feel you need to say and leave it at that. Like, don't
And
look
I
at the
feel like
results, don't think about that.
he does that to people who are shy and introverted. I mean, I why is he doing that? I mean, he just wants to mess
I
us up.
think, no, I don't think it's that at all. I think it is, we have been repressed,
Yeah.
oppressed, and like, so we have been silenced by the enemy for so many years
Hmm.
because the enemy knew that our voice was going to create massive impact. And
Mm.
so
Yeah.
we've stayed silent because we have been broken. We have went through trauma. We have gone through all of this stuff because
Right.
the enemy has tried to silence us. And
Hmm.
so when we can use our voice, knowing like God is going to use it, doesn't matter if you say the right words. It doesn't matter if you say, or or like, or anything. Like, it doesn't matter if you stutter. You just, when God says speak, we have to speak
Yeah.
because it's his word. You don't have to
Hmm.
worry about it. Obviously, it needs to line up with scripture. But
Yeah.
for most of us, when we know God is speaking, we can use some discernment there. We
Right.
know, we
Yep.
know when it's God or potentially can be God, And so that's just so important. And I don't think I haven't even shared that part with you, but I do think like we are called the
Yeah.
pioneers. We are the ones who are breaking the cycles and generations and generations of these strongholds that have held us back. And we're breaking, like God is using us to break those. And so
Right.
using our voice and speaking, being willing to go first, being willing to do the hard things, even when they're scary,
Yeah.
is allowing God to move. And for those around us, remember, I've talked about this before. You probably heard it before. I know you have. When Peter got out of the boat, it didn't just change him, it also changed those who were in the boat.
Yep.
And so the people that are watching you walk this out and do the hard things, like
Mm-hmm.
it's impacting them as well. And
Yeah.
it is, whether you see it or not, God is doing something. And I as we wrap up, I just want to say that again. Like, you had this fear of going back to church, and you've had the longing, and you were so
Mm-hmm.
worried about like what could have happened. We didn't even get into the touching part where you were like scared of people touching you and hugging on you and all that, which I totally get because I am not a hugger. I don't want people like coming and touching me and all that stuff. I'm better than I was, but it's still hard. But like, those were real fears that you
Yeah.
had. We can laugh now, but they were
Right.
real and they were
I know.
terrifying. And you had to walk in the fear
Yeah.
and trust God in it. And I wanted you on this podcast just as a reminder to other people that God
Mm-hmm.
knows. God knows. He
Yeah.
knows your biggest fears. He knows like those tender parts of you that it will wreck you if this was to happen or that
Yeah.
was to happen. Like he
Right.
knows. He knows when he is calling you to stretch yourself and walk this out. He knew Peter was going to start sinking. He knew that,
Yeah.
and he caught him
Mm-hmm.
and grabbed him. And so um I just think it's very comforting to know that you can trust God and he
Yep.
will align things with you for you so that you can continue to walk these things out.
Exactly. Exactly. And that is really a comforting feeling. That he didn't just disregard me. Like, he knew how I was feeling about certain things and made sure that I could ease into it. So,
Yes, absolutely. Hold on. I have mm, yeah, absolutely. And it is, God is just so good. Like, it leaves me speechless to know, when I had my fears of going back to church, and I was
mhm.
like, every church has let me down pretty much. Or
Yeah.
the other, I find my place, and then God says, just kidding. We're going to move you across country again. You know, it's so hard. But I
Mhm.
know that God's plan is perfect and he will use every situation, whether they were from him or something the enemy did. He will
Mhm.
use it and good will come out of it. And
Yep.
just like this conversation between you and I, the
Right.
enemy wanted to keep us from coming back to church. And he
Yep.
did for a short bit.
Yep.
And now we are having a conversation that is going to be so relatable to so many people who are thinking the same thing. Like, I can't go back.
Yeah.
I went through a divorce, or the
Mhm.
church failed me. They rejected me. And, like, those are
Mhm.
some big feelings.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about it, and other people are going to be encouraged to go back to church.
I hope so. I mean, because if you've got that yearning in your heart to be closer to God and to, learn more about the Bible, then, I mean, don't wait as long as I did to go back. Find a place and go back. I think a conversation we had on a coaching call with I think with Tammy, she said we tried several different churches before finding the one that we go to now. There's nothing wrong with going and just, discovering different congregations. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I think I'm making this harder than what it should be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's just me.
Same, same.
But
Okay, well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on and just
well,
being
thank
willing
you.
to be vulnerable and share a little bit of
Hmm.
the journey that you've been on to go back to church because, man, God is good.
Yeah, I'm just glad I didn't start bawling. So,
Yeah, you did good. You did good. All right, I have another call that I'm now 10 minutes late for. So
oh Lord.
that's why I was like, hold on. I looked at the time and saw yeah, I have another quick call with someone. She has a podcast that's about the nudges, like the God nudges.
Oh, okay.
Is that not a cool like podcast? I can't wait to listen to one of her episodes. Anyways,
That sounds
excuse me.
great.
All right, guys, it was great chatting with you. I hope you loved this conversation. And again, today is Friday, Sunday's coming. And if you haven't been going to church, just reach out. Reach out to Nikki, reach out to myself. Like,
Hmm.
we
Yeah.
will, like, I'm willing to do some research for you, right, Nikki?
Yeah, she
Like,
did. She sent me
and
some great information.
I was like, here, this one, this would be my first pick. I'm not quite sure if you would like the second one. And again, um, look at, I think one thing we didn't really talk about a lot that probably we could have went a little deeper was, I remember in the beginning, it was like you couldn't find anything that was perfect. Like you were looking for the perfect church that
Yeah.
had everything, which is ironic that you wanted everything your old church had, but they weren't, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I
why?
think I was using that as just something to delay me going back because I was just so afraid.
Yeah.
So,
Well, enjoy. And I feel like you're going to be a house mom soon.
thank you.
All righty. I will talk to you guys later.
All right.